All right. Hi, guys. So I decided to make a video for today. So this should be for Thursday. Hopefully you saw on Google Classroom posted yesterday that I was just as unexpectedly home again with my kids. I just got them COVID tested. I don't think it is, but I'm just being cautious. And then Thursday and Friday, I'll be out of town. Well, depending on the COVID tests. Because if they test positive, I obviously won't go anywhere. But my aunt passed away over the last weekend from COVID. So anyways, I'm so sorry. I normally don't, not out this often. So it's kind of driving me crazy. But I also felt like you guys could probably plug along pretty well taking the test still, so that hopefully I can come back Monday roaring to go with our forestry unit. So that's kind of what's next. So since this is our first test, I wanted to first just make sure you understood that the study guide that you should have got yesterday in class is worth points. So it's worth it for you to sit in class, use your notes, and fill in that study guide. I'll have the sub collected on Friday, right before the test. And yeah, so do the study guide. I have a little list here. What's next on my list? Oh, the test. So this test, which will be pretty similar to the rest of mine, on the test, you won't be able to use notes or your study guide. The test will have, this one has 40 multiple choice questions, and then one page that's like short answer, extended response, a couple opinion questions, and I'll actually kind of try to go over some of the stuff right now, kind of review some of the content in the video here. A reminder that I do accept late assignments, and so far that we've done one big ecology unit. So if you get any of your ecology assignments in before tomorrow, just turn them into the sub. So today or tomorrow, then you get 75% credit, which is great. After tomorrow, so after the test, if we start a new unit, then it goes down to half credit. So I always accept late work, but it does go down to half credit. So if you know that there's something out there on Google Classroom or papers in your folder that you haven't turned in, please make sure that you turn them into the sub either today or tomorrow. Oh, I posted a Quizlet. So some of you are really good at Quizlet, and it's actually not that many terms for this unit, but I posted that. It's optional, so I don't have the fancy subscription to give you credit or anything. So it's just there for you to use. But the period today, so for Thursday, is to watch this video, complete the study guide, and then use the Quizlet if you have time. So the Quizlet should be there and posted for you. And then lastly, I'm going to try to kind of go through just a little bit of content. Normally, we would have played a whole period of bingo with prizes, and it also would have given me a chance to go over, kind of review some of the content. So, oh my heavens, it's been so long since I shared my screen. Oh, golly, no. Okay. So, I'm just going to kind of use the notes as a guide here. So, obviously this whole unit's been ecology. We've been looking at the relationships between organisms and their environment. Definitely be familiar with abiotic and biotic factors. So remember, biotic factors are anything living, any living factors, and abiotic are non-living. Levels of organization, definitely have these memorized for the test, but they're not that tricky, right? So an organism is one individual all the way up to the biosphere. Those are on the Quizlet. So if you're having a hard time with those, definitely use the Quizlet to kind of flip through and make flashcards or whatever you use on Quizlet to help you memorize them. But You should be familiar with the levels of organization. A niche is a role a species plays in a community or its total way of life. So a description of pretty much anything an organism does is included in its niche. So what does it eat? How does it get its food? How does it get its energy? Where does it live? How does it find a mate? How does it mate? How does it reproduce? Things like that. A habitat is just the place in which an organism lives. A limiting factor is a factor that restricts the existence. So if it's anything, think of it as if it's anything that's limited, would it affect the population? So like food. If food was limited, it would definitely affect the population growth, right? Succession. So we did a quick little project on succession. There's 2 types. So this is just change over time. And this is like very expected, nowadays pretty predictable. So primary succession occurs when a disturbance is so severe that there's no vegetation. So we're looking at bare rock. There's no soil, no life there. Primary succession takes much, much longer, right? Because you have to imagine that the pioneer species kind of move in, they live on bare rock, and then as they die and get broken down and slowly build up a little bed of soil, more and more plants and animals can move in. So primary succession is no vegetation, no soil, but it takes a lot longer. The pioneer species is the first species to colonize that area. So a lot of times around here, pioneer species are lichens that we talked about, which are like the stuff that was growing on the logs over my classroom. Mosses are pioneer species, like things like that. A secondary succession is when there's a huge disturbance, but it actually leaves the soil behind. So examples of this were like really massive wildfires, clear cutting a forest, things like that. The climax community is kind of like the final product. So here in Ohio, if we left land untouched and unmanaged, most of it after many, many, many years would end up being like a hardwood forest, right? Where we live. Some scientists actually remember that climax communities aren't, they don't really like the term because they're going to argue that everything is forever changing. So a hardwood forest is still going to have environmental disturbances and human disturbances that are just constantly, that it's constantly changing and overcoming those challenges. So remember, invasive species are non-native organisms that spread too widely in a community. So these are plants or animals that are introduced either on purpose or by accident. And they're actually like more adapt for that environment than the native species. So they grow and grow and grow and grow. But because of that, they actually take over the plants or animals that should be living there. Memorize these little feeding relationships. I think they're pretty simple, but if you don't have them memorized, those should be on the Quizlet that I posted. Same with things like predator and omnivore and decomposers. Remember the symbiotic relationships. So a symbiosis are when 2 species are living really closely together. And there were 3 different examples. So commensalism is when one species benefits and the other one isn't really helped or harmed. Parasitism is when one species benefits, but the other one actually is harmed. And then mutualism is when both species benefit. Be familiar with the term trophic level. So looking in the pyramid here, a trophic level is just one feeding step. So like right here, the little herbivores, that's one trophic level. The primary carnivores, that's one trophic level. The biomass, so bio, think living. So biomass is just the amount of living stuff. Sorry, I'm texting my husband to tell him to remember to pick up my baby from daycare. Okay, so biomass is the amount of living stuff. And remember that biomass decreases as we go up the food chain, along with energy. So definitely remember the 10% rule, which basically says that as we go up the trophic level or the pyramid, like here in the notes, that only 10% of the energy is passed on. So every time an organism consumes something, 10% of the energy is retained, and then the other 90% is basically used by the organism. It's used in reproduction, it's used to digest food, it's used to maintain our pH, our blood pH, our body temperature, things like that. Remember the difference between a food chain and a food web. So a food chain is a really simplified possibility of how energy is being passed. So you can see here, we're starting with grass, and then we go to a grasshopper and the little mouse and then an owl. And a food web is just a much more complex network that shows like all the possible, or a whole bunch of possible pathways within the ecosystem. Keep in mind the nutrient cycles. So just focus on what is in the notes. So water, really the newest term there was transpiration, which is evaporation from like the surface of plants. So if you imagine a forest on a hot sunny day, there's actually a lot of water that's going to be evaporating from the surface of the leaves. Carbon is cycled through respiration. So like we breathe out carbon, remember, and then the trees take it in through photosynthesis. So a majority of carbon naturally is pretty much cycled through animals like us that exhale carbon and then taken in by plants. Now, one of the things that we'll talk about in our climate change unit is that we're actually offsetting that carbon cycle because we're releasing way more carbon dioxide than we would naturally, because we're burning so many fossil fuels. So when we burn fossil fuels for the electricity to watch this video, or however you got to school today, we're releasing extra carbon into the atmosphere, and that is what's causing a warming or a changing of our climate. The nitrogen cycle. So remember that 78% of Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen. We're breathing, every breath is 78% nitrogen, and we exhale it all right back out. So remember, our lungs have no way to retain that nitrogen. However, we need nitrogen to survive. So we actually get it from our food, and it gets what we call fixed. So nitrogen fixation is the process of taking like the atmospheric, the gaseous form of nitrogen, and making it into a usable form. A little bit of nitrogen gets fixed in the chemical equation caused by lightning, actually. So a little bit in every lightning strike, a little bit of nitrogen gets fixed, but that's really, really minuscule in the big picture. Most of the nitrogen is fixed from bacteria. Sorry, I got distracted by my notes. Bacteria in plants like legumes. So the bacteria in the soil of the roots of these plants are fixing nitrogen, and then it gets kind of passed on through the ecosystem. So we actually get most of the nitrogen that we need through our food. And then the last big topic you should definitely be familiar with is biological magnification, or biomagnification. And this, remember, is the increase of a toxin as we move up the food chain. We did the M&M lab with this. I guess we did 2 M&M labs, right? Where we saw the DDT increase as we go up the food chain. And the same thing is happening out in the environment with a number of different toxins. And remember, this occurs because these toxins our bodies aren't able to flush them out. So They don't get washed out with our poop and our pee. And instead, they actually get stuck in our tissues, and then they accumulate over time and accumulate over time. So out in the environment, plants and animals are accumulating a particular amount. But what we see, remember, is as we go up the food chain, the concentrations increase. And a great example of biological magnification was the DDT in the bald eagles. So remember, we used the chemical DDT really widely to as a pesticide. It's a really efficient pesticide. And one of the biggest red flags was that we noticed that the bald eagle population all across the country was dwindling. And scientists were able to tie it back to biomagnification of this chemical DDT. So even though the plants in the areas where the eagles were living, the DDT content was actually pretty low in their tissues, as organisms just continued to eat the DDT and accumulate it, it just got passed up all the way up, in this example, to the eagles that were at the top of the food chain. And it just so happened that they were affected by the chemical when it came to produce the shell of their eggs, remember? So the eggs shells were paper thin. So, all right, I think that is it. You can email me if you have questions. I'm going to try to do my best to respond, but as I said, I'm awaiting COVID tests, planning to go out of town. So I probably, I might be on the road or I might be sitting at home bored. So if you have questions on content, feel free to email me. Otherwise, the sub on Friday will give you guys the test. Remember, the first thing they'll do is collect your study guide. They'll pass out the test. You'll be working silently by yourself. And on the test, you won't be using any notes or study guides. Okay, I think that's all on my list to tell you guys. Thanks again for your patience. And believe me, I really hope to see you guys Monday. So have a good weekend.